Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Fox 29 News Now. I'm Paul Ruppel. I'm the Digital Media Manager here at Fox 29. Thank you for joining us. We're with you each day after Good Day Philadelphia at 10 a.m. Each weekday after Good Day Philadelphia at 10 a.m. Happy Thursday. We've got one more. We've got today, and then one more work day to end the week. We are keeping an eye on weather conditions outside. If you get a chance today, you are going to want to step outside. It's quite pleasant out there. It's warming up right now. I think we did start in the lower 30s in many places, maybe even the 20s. But we're going to be zooming into the 60s today. So something to look forward to for lunchtime. If you can grab a bite outside, certainly going to be worth your while. Let's take a quick look at the current conditions for you. We're actually up to 44 degrees already this morning. We're pretty close to the freezing point when my kids were headed to the bus stop this morning. 44 right now, dew point is 33, winds out of the east at 3 miles per hour. Here's a live look at Market Street, looking east from our studios at 4th and Market. Excuse me. A look at your radar. We will be getting precipitation into the area tomorrow in the form of rain, potentially thunderstorms. I'm sure you're excited just to be hearing about rain rather than what we've had, snow. Right now, let's take you live to an event that's getting underway. This is the GOP, Republican leader Kevin McCarthy and ranking members on the House committees holding a press conference on the Green New Deal, the Democrats' proposal to deal with environmental issues. Let's listen into Speaker McCarthy right now.
Actually has hearings in their committees. This is the start of a conversation that I believe is long overdue. One that Congress and its committees should have immediately. Congressional committees are where ideas like the Green New Deal should be debated. Only through the scrutiny of the legislative process can the American people get a true sense of how these proposals and sound bites translate into actual policy. We know so far that the Green New Deal proposes would control nearly every element of our lives, from our travel to home ownership to what agriculture we could actually even grow. And this is just the start. Its national mobilization includes government takeover of healthcare, free college, and an international exchange of technology that would stifle innovation and put America at a global disadvantage. Here's what the authors and co-sponsors of the Green New Deal aren't telling the American people. First, it is a bad deal for the working families and the low income. Many of the constituents that are in my district. Each provision I just mentioned would disproportionately hurt the very people the author claims and proposes to support. In my home state of California, for example, civil rights leaders are suing the state for climate policies that they argue drive up the cost of housing and cause a disproportionate amount of harm to the state's poorest residents. The Green New Deal also threatens to throw away groundbreaking innovation that has already set the decline in American greenhouse gas emissions. Like fracking and natural gas revolutions, solar and wind power and electric cars are just a few of the technologies that's caused American energy-related carbon emissions to hit a 25-year low in 2017, all while energy production and employment has soared. We have a responsibility to fully understand all the impacts of the Green New Deal and the impact that it will have not on our nation, but will America be able to lead for the next century. You know, Woodrow Wilson, who many claim to be one of a great political scientist, he is quoted as saying, "As Congress in its committee rooms is Congress at work." We believe that to be true. We need to get to work debating the Green New Deal. We do not want to repeat the mistakes that the Democrats made on H.R. 1, their very most important bill, referred to a number of committees, but only one committee marked it up, even though the chair of that committee, Zoe Lofgren, promised that all the other committees would mark it up. 40% of that bill was never marked up when it came to the floor. This Green New Deal affects too much of every aspect of our life. Not just whether your job will be there, but the cost what it will be to every home, to the ability to travel, or even to the agriculture we grow. That's why we want to have an open process, much as Speaker Pelosi claimed to have on her opening day when she became Speaker. So now I'd like to turn the podium over to our ranking member on Energy and Commerce, Greg Walden.
Thank you, Mr. Leader, and good morning, everyone. Thanks for being here. We're here for an important reason, and that is to hold Democrats accountable, to allow Congress to do its job. We're here today to call upon Speaker Pelosi to hold hearings on the Green New Deal, a plan that has become a central plank in her party's platform. It's billed as a solution for climate change. The Green New Deal threatens the entire United States economy, and it stretches into every corner of American life. From one-size-fits-all government-run health care to federal job and wage guarantees to federally mandated building upgrades to 100% zero-emission energy in just 10 years. And not only do we believe this is unrealistic, we fear it could permanently put the American dream out of the reach of millions of Americans. We're not alone. The AFL-CIO thinks the same thing. That's why these 11 Republican leaders from the committees who have jurisdiction over the Green New Deal have called on Speaker Pelosi and her committee chairs to do the right thing, and that is hold hearings on this sweeping plan. The truth is, House Democrats, the leaders, know exactly who has won the debate inside their party. That debate inside their party, I think, is pretty much over. The socialist left, led by Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Bernie Sanders, they've won. And now Speaker Pelosi and her lieutenants are hoping to paper over this growing gap. I say, let's let the American people have a say and a view on these policies. How Democrats should stand behind their proposals and give the American people the chance to learn what they're really about. If Democrats and their allies dispute the various estimates that show the Green New Deal costs $93 trillion, then I say one thing, prove it. Let's see your numbers. Let's hold hearings. Let's pull the curtain back and see where the Socialist Democrats stand and how American people might feel about the 22% increase in their energy costs. Frankly, House Democrats, I think, are afraid to have this debate in public and in the committees, because they know the sensible resolutions and proposals that Republicans are put forward are better. We're all about innovation, conservation, adaptation, and preparation. We've been about it in the Energy and Commerce Committee, certainly in the last Congress, and passed multiple bills that actually help lead to reductions in carbon emissions and more affordable energy, not only for us, but cleaner energy for the world. We want clean air, clean water, environmental protection, but those things do not have to be achieved at the expense of American workers, prosperity, and our own national security. Vibrant energy sector competition and innovation have already produced significant carbon emission declines in the United States, whereas emissions around the world, frankly, continue to rise, particularly in China and India. So, Speaker Pelosi, please direct your committee chairs to hold hearings on this legislation. Republicans are ready and willing to continue to have serious solutions-oriented discussions about how to protect our environment and how to advance America's prosperity. So we hope you'll hold hearings and do so soon. With that, I would welcome the chairman, the former chairman of the Resources Committee, the future chairman in exile of the Resources Committee, Mr. Bishop.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity of being here. For many people who live in the West, but also in rural and urban areas, the ideas behind the Green New Deal are tantamount to genocide. That may be an overstatement, but not by a whole lot. The genesis of this concept is really coming from Easterners who live in an urban setting and have no view of what it's like in the rest of America. When they judge distance not in miles but in subway stops, you realize there is something that needs to be discussed with this particular process. Now, in our resource committee, Mr. Graves from Louisiana over there introduced a proposal to our rules that would require any discussion that we would have in that committee to also analyze the impact of finances and economic impacts on that particular proposal. One of the, it was a humble request, but one of the Democrat freshmen that's on our committee said the following. I want to quote him exactly here. He said, as these discussions happen, I think you bring out a really good point. Not only that some of the costs and how they affect industries and businesses, but even in the costs and how they affect people, their utility bills, and what's going to happen. Then he went on further. I think we have to be very mindful of people, their jobs, their ability to pay their bills, because of the changes that we make. And this is a discussion that should always be had. We shouldn't just be speaking in the theoretical. So this is very, very important, and I hope that we continue to have this conversation because I think it's one worth having. Then they went on to defeat the proposal, ironically. But nonetheless, what he said is spot on and it's accurate. So we're calling on the majority party, the current, hopefully short-lived majority party, to have serious discussions in all of the committees of jurisdiction in their areas of jurisdiction. I realize in my committee, the last climate change hearing, the discussion points were opioid addiction and concussions in the NFL. I'm sure you can find some nexus somewhere to that. That's not what we're talking about. Not just hearings to check the box. If you're going to take this seriously, then we want to have serious discussions, and every ranking member down here has a committee that has a jurisdictional nexus and should be part of that. So we definitely call, if you're going to go forward with this theoretical idea, let's come up and actually discuss what the details are. And with that, I'd like to introduce another one of my Western colleagues who has the area of what happens to rural America, Mr. Conlon.
Thanks, Rob. It seems that our Democrat majority is most interested in doing the bidding of the extreme environmentalist groups with blatant disregard for the impact it will have on our farmers, ranchers, and rural Americans. Either the proponents of the New Green Deal don't grasp the consequences of these policies that they will have on agriculture in rural America, or the cynic would say they simply don't care. Just 3 months ago, the 2018 Farm Bill was signed into law, a 5-year comprehensive reauthorization act covering farm, conservation, and nutrition policy in our country. It was completed after 2 years of work by the committee. The process included listening sessions across the United States, more than 100 hearings, and bipartisan discussion and collaboration between members on the committee. The Farm Bill protects farm and forest lands and assists producers in voluntary practices that sequester carbon, reduce pollution and greenhouse gas emissions, preserve farmland, and improve the energy efficiency of farming practices while providing America with abundant and affordable food and fiber. In contrast, this new Green Deal aims to uproot the basic underpinnings of our farming and manufacturing, energy, and transportation systems and require changes of marginal and unknown benefit that come at great expense to the average taxpaying American citizen and business. This or any other similarly extreme proposal must have thorough public scrutiny before Congress takes any additional action. There's a lot that we don't know about the Green Deal, but however, there's a lot that we do know. We know that in rural America, rural Americans travel further distances, have higher energy costs, and have lower medium incomes than urban Americans, making them least able to shoulder the new burdens of this new Green Deal. The same applies to rural jobs like manufacturing and small rural businesses that have a harder time adapting to any new green technology. We also know that U.S. agriculture uses a tiny percentage of energy consumed in the United States, but that the changes proposed in the new Green Deal would have significant implications for the ability of U.S. agricultural system to continue to meet demands of fresh, safe, and affordable food, both here in the United States and around the world. And while they're already walking back such silly plans as to regulate or eliminate noxious odors coming from cows, the proposal is completely out of touch and ignores the technological advances made by the agricultural section over the last 30 years, including doubling agricultural production, reducing energy use by 30%, while not increasing greenhouse gas emissions. And most of all, we know that U.S. farmers and ranchers are best stewards of our rural land and that they accomplish these gains voluntarily and through ingenuity. I'm very supportive of working to improve our environment. I'm also very supportive of working to improve rural infrastructure. And I'm supportive of doing everything we can for all of the U.S. farms, 98% of which are family-owned. But I cannot support attempts to foist additional regulations on the backs of our farmers and ranchers, certainly without additional scrutiny and hearings by the committees of jurisdiction. Madam Speaker, please instruct your committee chairs to have the hearings necessary to ferret out this new Green Deal. And I now ask to Sam Graves, ranking member of the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee.
Thanks, everyone. I appreciate this opportunity. From a transportation standpoint, if you look at the Green New Deal, it's fantasy land. It's fantasy land proposal. This idea that we're going to eliminate aviation in the United States it's ridiculous if you think about it. If you're saying that aviation is not necessary in the United States, and you're also saying that the 11 million jobs that aviation creates are also unnecessary. And then you think about the idea that we're going to replace aviation with high-speed rail, which has yet to work in the United States. And all you have to do is look to California to see what the high-speed rail proposal out there, what happened with it. It collapsed. The proposal is done simply because of the extraordinary cost associated with putting this together. Now, if you want to talk about the alternatives, and this is one of the things that a lot of folks, particularly from the East Coast urban areas, fail to understand when it comes to alternatives. If you're taking your kids to school or you're going to work, that's one thing, to get an electric car or an alternative fuel car. But if you're moving products and goods across this country, there is no alternative. There's no alternative for the jet engine. There's no alternative for a diesel engine, high horsepower, in a barge tug. You can't plug the barge in tonight and run it up the river tomorrow. There's no alternative. There's no alternative right now for pulling large trains full of goods across this country. There's no alternative for cargo ships running goods across our oceans. There just simply isn't an alternative, and that's pure commerce. That is absolute commerce. And we have to do everything we can to make sure that it doesn't upset the balance in the United States and completely collapse our economy as a result. Now I'll turn to Representative Lucas. Next, a little taller.
Thank you, Sam. And thank you, Leader for McCarthy, for putting this together. In addition to my job of being the ranking member of the Space and Technology Committee, I represent the good folks of the 3rd District of Oklahoma. And addressing climate change impact on them and ensuring that we keep energy prices competitive so we can protect our jobs and promote economic growth is a big part of my responsibility. We have a saying in Oklahoma, it's an old saying, and it goes something like, there's a fine line between doing things for people and doing things to people. Our responsibility as members of Congress is to do things for people, not to force higher energy prices, higher taxes on Americans with pie-in-the-sky, unrealistic proposals. That's not a Green New Deal. It's just a bad deal. And the ones paying the price for a bad deal will be the American consumers and American businessmen and women. By some estimates, this proposal, and it's hard to gauge because the proposal keeps changing, might cost as much as $600,000 per household. That's an incredible amount of money. That's an incredible amount of money. Our responsibility on the Science Committee should be focused on how do we use research, technology transfer, innovative programs to address the issues that are important out there to our folks. Batteries that store energy from intermittent power sources, advanced nuclear reactors, carbon capture. But the bottom line remains, as my colleagues have stressed so accurately, this new Green Deal, the vague document that we're trying to assess, we won't know until it goes through regular congressional order. That's hearings in all of the affected committees, so we can get to the facts, so that we can determine the validity or lack of validity of the policy proposals. And ultimately, that determines what it does to our people back home. We're here for the folks back home. Remember, we're here to do things for people. There may be people in this place who are here to do things to people, but that's not us. And with that, I turn to my colleague, the ranking member of the Financial Services Committee from North Carolina, Mr. McHenry.
Thank you. Thank you, Gigantor, for yielding.
Price you pay for being free.
That's right. So I'm glad Sam Graves and I kind of sandwiched in. Anyway, so I'll skip forward. Look, I think what is happening in our climate is an important discussion for us to have as policymakers, as Americans. It's an important conversation we should have globally. There are important things that we should be doing to improve the efficiency of everything we use and to reduce harmful greenhouse emissions. Those are the things that we should be working on in a bipartisan way and using innovation and technology. But what we have before us is called the Green New Deal. It is no deal at all for the American taxpayer and for the average American. It hurts the very people that it's intended to help and hurts people in every single state in this nation. So let's focus on the House Financial Services Committee and the jurisdiction I'm working in. The Green New Deal requires every single housing unit in America meet a new energy and water efficiency standard with zero emissions. So let's unpack what that costs. So we have roughly 130 million households in America. And the Green New Deal would cost each one of these households between $13,000 and $34,000 to upfit or retrofit this housing stock. This is the housing stock in America is the median age is 36 years for this housing stock. So that's a lot of money when you're talking about the whole of our housing stock. But if you just look at HUD-owned and directly subsidized housing, that's 5 million units. So let's apply that for what that would mean in direct government outlays to retrofit those 5 million HUD-subsidized units. It would cost between $66 billion and $172 billion. That is larger than the whole of HUD's budget since its inception. So these numbers are staggering, and the impact it has on the American people is real, and it's negative. We should be having a substantive conversation of the things that we should be doing in a bipartisan way to achieve outcomes. On this matter, though, on housing, we put it to a vote last week in the House Financial Services Committee. Sean Duffy from Wisconsin offered the amendment that is the direct verbatim piece of housing applied to House Financial Services Committee, and it was unanimously voted down. In fact, the chair of the committee called it an unserious offering of an amendment. It's a very serious consequence, though. If we allow this harmful policy to be put in place, it will have a harmful effect on affordable housing and a harmful effect especially on those that are on the margins. So with that, I yield to Garrett Graves of Louisiana.
Thank you. I want to thank the authors of the Green New Deal for brainstorming and throwing out concepts to help improve our environment, to help bring down energy costs, to help to raise wages and provide better job opportunities for all Americans. Because you know what? Those are objectives that I share. But I think it's important to dig in to the proposal that was actually put on the table. When you actually look at it and you dig into it, it resembles more of a political memo that was accidentally converted into legislation, or some type of utopian grammar school exercise that was accidentally turned into legislation. When you look at the objectives, look at what has actually been accomplished by Republicans and by a Republican majority. You want to talk about raising wages, look at what we did in regard to helping to level the playing field for American workers, for American businesses across the globe, and look at how we reduced unemployment to record levels. Look at how we raised wages to record levels. Look at how we provided nearly unprecedented job opportunities, employment opportunities for all Americans. Those are the strategies. Revising our tax code, helping to modernize our regulations. Those are the strategies that provide opportunities for Americans. As has been noted, this package is estimated to cost perhaps $93 billion. Trillion dollars. $93 trillion. We add to that the $30+ trillion Medicare for all, the $22 trillion debt this nation has today. $450,000 per man, woman, and child in this nation. We need to unpack this. We need to have hearings. We need to have discussions. I've heard Democrats over and over again accuse Republicans of denying science, as Chairman Bishop noted. There's another type of science that's being denied here, and it's called economic science. Economic science is being denied. My home state of Louisiana, we have the lowest energy rates in the nation. Look at the states that are advocating or proposing this Green New Deal concept. Those are the states that have the highest electricity bills in the country. Is that the model that we want to replicate? Moving in a direction of Obamacare, where we were told that government intervention in healthcare was going to reduce costs, and we've seen the complete opposite. Is that the model that we want to replicate? The Green New Deal has a credibility gap. There are clear strategies that have been accomplished by Republicans that clearly achieve the objectives that are identified in the Green New Deal, but it is a very different path to that success than we've seen in this deal as proposed. Thank you.
Take one quick question because I only got 40 to go.
So I read that you were on an airplane back and reading some article about AOC. Just wondering, she's clearly the champion of the Green New Deal. Is this part of a strategy to target her? She's asserted that Republicans are obsessed with her. Are Republicans obsessed?
No, it's interesting. I was on my phone going through as I was flying into D.C. up from New York. It was when Omar, the leadership, talked about doing a resolution against the anti-Semitic comments that Omar had made. And I think it was Politico that said something that referring to whether the article would come up. So I was reading all the different articles. A former Obama administration employee felt to look over my phone and thought it was interesting that I was reading articles about politics and what was coming up on the floor. But he rephrased it to it was an AOC article.
It wasn't AOC.
I think it had AOC in it, but it was just reading up. Last question, I got to go.
Yep. Could you identify the most significant piece of climate legislation that House Republicans are working on right now?
You know, there's a number of them introduced. Gladly to walk you through a whole proposal of them. If you talk to Garrett Graves as the ranking member of
Sure, but
Climate, he's got a great
which one do you
proposal.
think is most
I will
significant?
come back. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thanks.
You've been watching GOP ranking House committee members discuss calling for hearings on the Green New Deal, one of the Democrats' signature proposals before the Congress. You heard one of the members there talking about this being seeming like not a quite finished proposal, and kind of talking about that in jest. I think that's the Democrats' argument, is that it is a relatively rough idea, and they do intend to hold hearings. The GOP here was calling for them to hold hearings and discuss more, but I don't believe that the Democrats have said they won't hold hearings. Just that it sounds like a memo outlining most of the proposal has been put out there, and it's not quite a finished product. In the Senate, Minority Leader Chuck Schumer is addressing the Senate right now. He is presumably talking about the vote that will take place in the Senate today about the President's national emergency declaration at the southern border. His remarks follow McConnell's remarks just moments ago, which I recorded for you. We'll see if we can get a chance to play that back. But let's listen into what Chuck Schumer is saying about the vote today in the Senate.
But this one would. But the president hasn't done that. He simply said he didn't need to do this. That's amazing, folks, my colleagues. The president says he didn't need to do this, and yet he's declaring an emergency. It's a direct contradiction of his own words. Well, everyone knows the truth here. Democrats and Republicans both know the sad truth. The president did not declare an emergency. The president did not declare an emergency because there is one. He declared an emergency because he lost in Congress and wants to get around it. He's obsessed with showing strength, and he couldn't just abandon his pursuit of the border wall. So he had to trample on the Constitution to continue his fight. Well, that is not how this democracy is supposed to function. That is not how this democracy has functioned. I've never seen it. We're at a peak, out of anger, out of a desire to win the fight regardless of the consequences, that a president would do this. Nor has the president laid out where he plans to divert funds from, though we know it's going to be from our military, from the men and women serving us, and from the things they need. Senators who vote against this resolution this afternoon may be voting to gut funding for a military installation in their state, or a cut to military pay and military pensions. How could they do that? But most importantly, Madam President, President Trump has shown zero understanding of what his emergency portends for the separation of powers in our democracy. The president seems to regard the government, not just the Justice Department, as his own personal tool to do whatever he wants, whether it's in the private sector or the public sector. We've never had a president like this. We've had lots of presidents with lots of foibles, but none of them seem to equate their own ego with the entire functioning of the government of the United States, except this one. Well, we can't succumb to that. It's our job here in Congress to limit executive overreach, to defend our core powers, to prevent a president, any president, from ignoring the will of Congress every time it fails to align with the will of the president. That's what balance of powers is. That's what checks and balances is. That's what every one of us learned in second grade civics class. But all that teaching in the second grade civics class seems to be lost on so many of my Republican colleagues in blind obeisance to this president, no matter what the consequences. This is not an issue of the wall. It goes way beyond that. We've had our fights and disputes on the wall for several years here. However you feel about our policy on the southern border, however you feel about the president, senators should vote yes on the resolution to terminate the emergency declaration. This resolution is about more than this president. It's about the presidency, now and on into the future. It should not be difficult for any of my Republican colleagues to take this vote. Conservative principles would demand it, and some of the true conservatives, like Mr. Lee yesterday, understood that logic. Conservatives have always feared an agglomeration of power in any branch of government, but particularly the executive. The conservative movement has been designed to reduce the powers of the federal government. That's why they're for lowering taxes so much. And all of a sudden, again, because President Trump simply wants it, they say, let's abandon those principles and vote to change fundamentally the way the balance of power works. Shame. If conservatism today is to mean anything, self-branded conservatives should vote to terminate the resolution. Deep-seated principles like that shouldn't take a back seat to the politics of the moment. They should not be abandoned just because the president shares the same party. Now, let me speak from the heart to my Republican colleagues. I know that President Trump is extremely popular among Republicans for many reasons. I know he commands the vast majority of the Republican Party. And I know that the president never shies away from threatening, bullying, or publicly castigating members of his own party if they refuse to do what he wants. So I realize this. This is a much more difficult vote for my colleagues on the other side of the aisle to take than for those of us who are Democrats. But I would say to them, I would say to every Republican, there are times when loyalty to America, to our Constitution, to our principles, to what has made this country great, should lead members to rise to the occasion. I hope, I pray, this moment is one of those times. When members choose country over party, when members rise above politics for the sake of fidelity to our constitutional principles and to this great United States of America. In conclusion, Madam President, on this issue, in conclusion, this is not an everyday moment. This is not just about going along with this president or that one. This is a red-letter day in the history of how the United States government functions. The judgment of our founding fathers, the judgment of history, weighs upon this vote. Now, on one final matter, China. The trade negotiations with China are moving forward. And I continue to have concerns that President Trump will accept a weak deal for the sake of a headline. Apparently, I'm not alone. President Trump's former top economic advisor, Gary Cohn, told a podcast that the president is, quote, desperate to reach a trade deal. He also expressed deep skepticism that the administration would be able to stop the Chinese from stealing intellectual property or from holding the Chinese accountable. I hope Gary Cohn is wrong. The president, to his credit, was not desperate for a deal in North Korea, stood up to Kim Jong-un, and looked strong for that. I hope he realizes that as he negotiates with someone with even more consequences at stake for the long run of America, President Xi, and for a country that can do far more harm to our country, ultimately, in the long run. Ambassador Lighthizer has said there are still major issues left to be resolved. If that's the case, President Trump should not be pressing for a quick solution. The Chinese are more desperate for a solution than we are, although, obviously, some harm has been created to bring the Chinese to the table with tariffs. But the Chinese are desperate. And it's like you're ahead in the 7th inning. And then you say, I quit the ball game. I lose. Don't do that, Mr. President. The tariffs you have imposed, at some political cost, have brought China to the table and given us the first opportunity in decades, to make the Chinese reform so they don't take total advantage of American workers and know-how. Soybean purchases, promises to import more American goods are not sufficient if we don't win concrete concessions on major issues. If President Trump caves to China for the sake of soybean purchases, he'd be trading America's future, literally, for a hill of beans. We want to help the soybean farmers. We want to help everybody else, but not at the expense of the future viability of jobs and wealth in America. So my message to President Trump is the same one I mentioned to him, I gave to him before he met with Kim Jong-un. Don't back down. The president should be proud that he stood up to North Korea and walked away. He will be proud if he does the same with China, unless President Xi makes enduring, verifiable reforms of China's economic and trade policies. Because the odds are high that if the president walks away from a weak deal, he'll be able to get a much better deal down the road. I yield the floor and once again thank my colleague from Tennessee.
That was Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer talking about the vote on the National Emergency Declaration, the national emergency at the southern border. I want to take you back a few minutes to Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell talking about the same topic. Here are his earlier remarks, where the GOP is expecting at least 5 defectors, I believe, have publicly announced they will vote against the president's national emergency declaration. Of course, this could all be a moot point. The president could override, veto that vote, regardless of the outcome. The House has already voted to block the national emergency declaration. The Senate confirming that here would then give the president an opportunity for the first veto of his administration, and he's already vowed to do that. But that hasn't stopped the GOP from attempting to, gain more support, make sure the vote's as close as possible, and perhaps head off a vote against the declaration. Here again are the remarks from Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell.
Article from this morning's Wall Street Journal.
Been the larger-than-life personality patrolling the Ohio Clock corridor, camping out in the press gallery, and prowling the hallways of the Capitol complex. The guy who knows everything about policy, procedure, and communications with the office just off the Senate floor. Stu is one of the best-known staff members in all of Congress. It's been my great fortune to lean heavily on him every single day for more than a decade as my communications director and deputy chief of staff. So you can imagine it's proving difficult to grasp that today, the very last workday, I'll have Stu by my side. After serving so well for so long, he's taking a leave for, shall we say, greener pastures. So this morning I'm exacting a little revenge. I'm doing the one thing that I suspect will make my Deputy Chief of Staff's stomach churn more than anything else. I'm actually turning the spotlight on him. Now, the complete legend of Stu is somewhat of a winding tale. The scrappy son of Riverside, California, did not stroll a typical path to the corridors of power. What came after high school was work, including what I understand was a spell as a bouncer. I'm certain that position offered no useful preparation at all for wrangling our distinguished friends in the press corps. Then came Army service, then back to school in Georgia, and then, Madam President, politics. Our late colleague, Senator Coverdale, hired Stu to represent him with his constituents down in Georgia. Not long after, he asked him to relocate to Washington. Now, the way I understand it, the ink was barely dry on Stu's lease, and the unpacking had just started when his boss tragically passed away. But Stu landed on his feet. He found his way to a pair of tough Texans, handling press for Senator Phil Gramm and then Senator Cornyn. He became famous as the communications director who could outsmart everybody and outwork everybody in a town where it's very hard to do either. That's where Stu caught my eye. As I prepared in 26 for the possibility of becoming a Republican leader, I knew we'd need the most sophisticated communication shop a Senate leader had ever constructed. And it was clear that Stu was the guy to build it. Something else quickly became clear, too. Stu was not quite like anybody else any of us had ever met before. One former colleague recalls that Stu would end a phone call with a plan already formed in his mind, then push off his desk with both hands, sending his rolling chair rocketing backwards and slamming into the wall behind him. The high-octane crash was the official notification that Stu was about to make something happen. It was actually really endearing, this colleague explained in retrospect. Restless energy has always been Stu's calling card. Every news story, every request from reporters, every shift in public sentiment, Stu was literally on top of it all. 7 days a week, almost literally 24 hours a day. I was recently reminded that in Stu's early days with me, some around the Capitol questioned whether he was an actual person or some kind of automated email system our office had built to blast out memos and bulletins literally around the clock. The instant that mobile devices started to provide email alerts, Stu's bat-like sleeping habits and inexhaustible work ethic probably rendered half the alarm clocks in Washington completely obsolete. Questions, answers, press clippings, battle plans, they'd pour into inboxes until after midnight, pause for a couple of hours, and resume before anyone else had even woken up. But circadian rhythms aren't the only thing Stu's presence reprogrammed. His energy, his careful foresight, his patriotism, all these things were just as infectious. As our chief spokesman, key strategist, and close advisor, team leader and morale builder, resident dog lover, heavy metal music aficionado, and happy warrior, Stu helped steer me and my office through the Iraq War, the financial crisis, seismic policy battles, and nomination debates. 3 different presidents, and 2 re-election campaigns. No matter what the day brought, I always knew what my Deputy Chief of Staff would bring. Razor-sharp instincts, a level head, a steady hand, and a boatload of integrity. So, for more than 12 years, I entrusted Stu with my words and my goals and my reputation. And he's never let me down. He never flagged, He never slowed. Our watchdog never lost a step. Totally trustworthy, completely reliable, unbelievably competent, the greatest luxury a leader could have. Now, with these characteristics, you might think the person I'm describing could be a little stiff, a little stern. Maybe that energy would occasionally boil over into harsh words or heated moments. But remember, Madam President, Stu is a bit of an unusual guy. That intensity doesn't overflow into frustration or unkindness or sharp words. Instead, it overflows into generosity, good-heartedness, and compassion. So Stu is famous around Washington for his encyclopedic memory of birthdays, kids' birthdays, and anniversaries. Like clockwork, notes and greeting cards arrive, texts and emails roll in. What I'm saying is that work challenges aren't the only thing Stu is good at keeping in perspective. I was reminded of that fact a few months back when Stu brought his mother, Nancy, to visit here in the Senate. For all the history Stu has helped make, for every victory.
You've been listening to Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell. I was expecting remarks about his about the vote coming today and trying to wrangle Republican votes for the president's emergency declaration, but Mr. McConnell is giving praise to his chief of staff there, who is departing. So I'm going to take you to, it looks like Jussie Smollett is back in court. This is tape delay, I believe. Let's listen in. It's either, see if this is going to start from the beginning here. Let's listen in a little bit.
Risa Lanier for the people, RISALANIER.
Tina Glandian on behalf of Jussie Smollett, who's present in court, and I'm accompanied by Ron Safer and Brian Watson.
All right, very good. All right, so the matter is here for assignment this morning. Marcus?
Judge Watkins.
Judge Watkins. Now, this is what we're going to do. I am going to pass this matter, recess this matter, and do my 9 o'clock call. I'm going to recall you at, I think, about 10 a.m. And at that time, well, I'll contact Judge Watkins and ask him to come down, and we'll do the arraignment here in this courtroom at 10 a.m. So we'll recess now. And obviously, if there's anything else, you'll let the sheriff know, or you'll let the clerks know, and they can contact me if there is anything else we need to discuss between now and then. All right?
Thank you,
all
Your
right,
Honor.
very good.
Thank
all
you.
right. A short recess.
Anyway, I wouldn't worry about those.
Okay.
They don't seem to be being used.
Hello, everyone. That was Jussie Smollett making a brief court appearance there. He was scheduled to be arraigned and have a judge assigned to his case today. Last week, a grand jury indicted him on 16 felony charges in connection with his reporting of an alleged attack. Back in January, the 36-year-old Empire star claimed two men physically attacked him while yelling racist and homophobic slurs, threw a chemical on him, and put a rope around his neck. However, the investigation turned when detectives suspected the actor. That's audio for the next event that's about to occur. The investigation turned when detectives suspected the actor staged the whole thing, recruiting and paying the men to attack him. Smollett, who is free on $100,000 bond, is denied lying to police or faking the attack. He's expected to plead not guilty to the charges against him. And what you heard there was they were before the judge, and I believe the judge was saying he was going to take a call before they moved on to his appearance. Right now we are awaiting the start of House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's news conference, her weekly news conference in D.C. We'll get you there as soon as possible. That is usually expected to occur around 10:45, so looks like it's running a little bit late. Let's listen into a little bit of the Senate debate. We will get you to some local news after the Speaker's press conference. We've got a couple stories queued up for you, including a look at the grounded Boeing planes and how that's affecting air travel, both nationally and locally, and some other stories. We'll also get you a full look at your 7-day forecast from the Fox 29 Weather Authority. In the meantime, let's listen into that discussion on the Senate floor ahead of the National Emergency Declaration vote.
Have ended the debate for this fiscal year, the year that we're in. And now the President is asking Congress for $8.6 billion for the border wall next year. That is his prerogative. But make no mistake, it is not only Congress's prerogative, it is Congress's constitutional responsibility to decide if he gets that money. As the old saying goes, the President proposes and Congress disposes. President Trump is being treated no differently than all previous presidents. That is how our constitutional system works, or at least how it's supposed to work. The President's emergency declaration is an end run around Congress, plain and simple. If any Democratic president issued an emergency declaration like this, say for climate change or gun safety funding, Republicans in this body would scream bloody murder and vote to disapprove. Now, I'm on record that climate change is one of the most pressing issues on our planet, and I'm on record that gun violence is a national crisis. But I have voted for and proposed actual legislation on these topics, as our system is supposed to work. No previous president has used the National Emergency Act to bypass the appropriations process like this. Our Constitution, the rule of law, separation of powers, all of these rise far above the day-to-day controversies like the President's border wall. On a practical note, the President wants to take real money away from real military construction projects that will have a real impact on national security. Military construction projects that have been vetted through years of scrutiny, through the military, through numerous congressional committees in Congress, projects deemed essential to the national security, projects all across the nation in your states now at risk. We have a long list of military construction projects threatened by the President, yet he has not bothered to tell us which projects will be cut to build his wall. Will he raise $793 million to rebuild Camp Lejeune in North Carolina after the devastation from Hurricane Florence? Will he steal up to $800 million for Navy ship maintenance to make sure that accidents like what happened to the USS McCain and USS Fitzgerald never happen again? Will he raid $125 million from my home state of New Mexico for Holloman Air Force Base to develop unmanned aerial vehicles to track terrorists, and for White Sands Missile Range to build a badly needed information systems facility? The answer is we don't know. But these critical projects in all of our states are at risk. We each need to think about our states and the people we were sent here to represent. I am from one of the 4 states that border Mexico, one of the 4 states that would be the most directly impacted by any border wall. And I'm here to tell you there is no national security emergency along my state's border with Mexico. What is happening at our border does not justify the use of this authority. New Mexico's border communities are flourishing with economic, cultural, and educational activity. Border communities are as safe or safer than others in the interior. This is not a partisan view along the border. Republican Will Hurd represents more than 500 miles of the Texas border with Mexico. He not only believes the president's emergency declaration is unconstitutional, he thinks the president's wall is, quote, the most expensive and least effective way to do border security. But again, whether you support or oppose the border wall is not an issue. What is at issue is our oath to support and defend the Constitution, whether any president can toss Congress aside and raid critical funds at will. We have an opportunity to stand up to an unconstitutional power grab. I urge everyone in this chamber to seize that opportunity. And with this, I would yield to Senator Collins, who from the beginning has worked with me, and we have our resolution in, and we are working hard to make sure that we stand up to the Constitution. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
I recognize the senator from Maine.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, later today, the Senate will make a significant decision with implications for our constitutional system of government. We will vote on a resolution to reverse the president's ill-advised national emergency declaration that funds the construction of a border wall using money that Congress has appropriated and the president has signed into law for other purposes such as military construction. I want to thank Senator Udall, the senator from New Mexico, for working together with me. We introduced a companion resolution to overturn the president's declaration, and I commend Senator Udall for his leadership. By declaring a national emergency, the president's action comes into direct conflict with Congress's authority to determine the appropriation of funds, a power vested in Congress by the framers of our Constitution in Article 1, Section 9. That is why this issue is not about strengthening our border security, a goal that I support and have voted to advance. Rather, Mr. President, it is a solemn occasion involving whether or not this body will stand up for its institutional prerogatives and will support the separation of powers enshrined in our Constitution. Throughout our history, the courts have consistently held that, quote, only Congress is empowered by the Constitution to adopt laws directing monies to be spent from the U.S. Treasury, end quote. For the past 65 years, the courts have determined the boundaries of presidential authority vis-a-vis Congress under the doctrine of Youngstown Steel, Sheet, and Tubing, the 1952 Supreme Court case which reversed President Truman's seizure of U.S. steel companies during the Korean War. As Justice Robert Jackson explained in his profoundly influential concurrence in that case, the question of whether a president's actions are constitutionally valid should be determined by examining the source of the president's authority. And in this concurrence, the justice goes through 3 scenarios in which he assesses the president's power. According to Justice Jackson, when acts taken by the president are against the express or implied will of Congress, the president's power is at its lowest ebb. Mr. President, President Trump's declaration clearly falls in that category. Now, the President rests his declaration on the National Emergencies Act, and that act fails to define precisely what constitutes an emergency. But there is a common sense rule that we can apply. It is a 5-part test that was used by the Office of Management and Budget under former President George Herbert Walker Bush to determine whether or not requested funding merited an emergency designation under our budget rules. Under that test, a spending request was designated as an emergency only if the need for spending met a 5-part test. It had to be necessary, sudden, urgent, unforeseen, and not permanent. Now, whether or not one agrees with President Trump that more should be done to secure our southern border, and I do agree with him on that goal, his decision to fund a border wall through a national emergency declaration would never pass all of this 5-part test. Another concern that I have with the President's declaration is that it shifts funding away from critical military construction projects. We don't know which ones. We've not been able to get a list. But this could have very real national security implications. And again, I would note that the Military Construction Appropriations Bill incorporated projects recommended by the President and his Department of Defense, was passed by both bodies and signed into law by the President. Let me emphasize once again that the question presented by this resolution is not whether you're for a border wall or against a border wall. It is not whether you believe that border security should be strengthened or whether it is sufficient. It is not whether or not we support or oppose President Trump. Rather, the question is a far more fundamental and significant one. The question is this: do we want the executive branch, now or in the future, to hold the power of the purse, a power that the framers deliberately entrusted to Congress? We must stand up and defend Congress's institutional powers as the framers intended that we would, even when doing so is inconvenient or goes against the outcome that we might prefer. I urge my colleagues to support the resolution of disapproval and our Constitution. Thank you, Mr. President.
Mr. President.
I recognize the senator from Vermont.
Mr. President, this is a debate worth happening. I appreciate the comments from my New England neighbor. It is an important matter for us to consider. When President Trump declared a national emergency, he cited a crisis at the southern border, but it's become more and more evident he did it for only one reason: to do an end run around Congress and the Appropriations Committee and use taxpayer money to build a wall on the southern border that Congress has refused to fund. For 3 years, he failed to convince a Congress, a Republican-controlled Senate, a Republican-controlled House, that his wall was a good idea. For 3 years, he requested that Congress fund his cynical campaign promise to build, quote, big, beautiful, close quote, wall on the southern border. And for 3 years, the Republican-controlled Congress refused. And so, even when his own party controlled both chambers of Congress, he couldn't convince enough members that it was a good idea. And certainly nobody accepted his pledge that Mexico would pay for the wall. We all knew the U.S. taxpayers would have to pay for it. So instead of accepting that we live in a democracy and he's not a monarch, instead of accepting that in a democracy there are two other co-equal branches of government that can constrain his actions, the president has decided to ignore the Constitution and the will of Congress and go it alone. Now, Article 1, Section 9 of the Constitution, as we all know, established that Congress, and actually Congress alone, has the power of the purse. Congress' exclusive power over our government's spending priorities is one of the most critical checks and balances in our constitutional system. Anybody who goes back and reads the history of the founding of this country and hear the debate and hear what George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, everybody else said, we know that from the founding of this country, and the reason we're the oldest existing democracy currently in the world is that we believed in the checks and balances. The president, of course, can propose funding for whatever projects he wants, but it's the job of Congress to decide where to invest the Americans' people hard-earned tax dollars. And in a democracy, as every president from George Washington to now is supposed to respect those decisions. But after not getting what he wanted, this president has invoked the National Emergencies Act. He's stretching the powers given to him in that act beyond all recognition. He's declared a national emergency on the southern border. But he's not responding to a national emergency. There's no crisis on our southern border requiring such extreme action. What kind of a national emergency is declared only after you lose a 3-year funding fight with members of your own party? What kind of national emergency is resolved, this national emergency, by a vaguely defined multi-year construction project? Truth is clear, he's trying to use this authority for a political end. Now, when Congress enacted the National Emergencies Act of 1976, it conveyed certain powers to the president to use in the event of a true emergency that required quick action, and it assumed, and I remember I was here during the debate, and there was a Republican president, that whoever sat in the Oval Office would have enough respect for the office and the power being conveyed not to abuse it. We felt, those of us in the Senate at that time, that whether it was a Republican or Democratic president, they would not abuse the power. Well, President Trump has failed that test. Presidential emergency powers should only be invoked in a true time of crisis. It's an abuse of power to invoke these authorities just because he couldn't do what he wanted any other way. But let's see what he would do if he has these powers. Now he wants to raise money meant for military housing, military base improvements, pay for his wall. This almost in the same week we see in the news so much of military housing is infested by mold, by rats, by asbestos, by all these other problems. He's going to take the money that would make this housing safe for the men and women in our military to pay for his wall. Or is he going to take money from Camp Lejeune that was hit by Hurricane Florence and badly, badly damaged? I know Camp Lejeune. My son, when he was in the Marines, spent time there. Or is he going to take it from Tyndall Air Force Base, which was flattened by Hurricane Michael? What about money for schools for military families, like the school at Fort Campbell, Kentucky, or a child development center at Joint Base Andrews in Maryland? Or essential training facilities that would ensure military readiness, like a special operations training facility at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, which I have visited. You know, Congress chose to fund these projects over an ineffectual, wasteful wall. Congress had to decide, where's the money go? We felt these things, to help our military be in better shape, made far more sense than the wall. Congress used its constitutional power, let me emphasize that, its constitutional power of the purse to set priorities, how we're going to invest the American people's hard-earned tax dollars. Now, the president's trying to label opponents of his action as weak on border security or weak on crime. That's nonsense. I don't know any member of the Senate of either party who doesn't believe in border security or is in favor of crime. But let's see what he asked for. Instead of border security, he wanted $5.7 billion for the wall. Instead, Congress approved a border security package, money for fencing along with technology at between the ports of entry and additional personnel. That's real border security, not a political stunt. Now the president is saying, well, thank you for your views, thank you for following your constitutional power, but I'm still going to do it my way. Now, where's it going to stop? And the fact that it is a political game has shown that when this Congress passed overwhelmingly $1.6 billion for border security, the president vetoed that. And then after closing the government for 35 days, costing the taxpayers billions and billions and billions of dollars for nothing, he signed a bill that did not give him the $1.6 billion that he vetoed, but gave him $1.3 billion, and that he signed. If anybody thinks this is just games playing, that states it. Over the past 2 years, we've seen the erosion of our institutional checks and balances in the face of creeping authoritarianism. The time has come for the Congress and members of the president's own party to take a stand. Congress simply cannot afford to remain silent in the face of such an unprecedented violation of the separation of powers. Now, I understand that Senator Lee has introduced a bill to reform the National Emergencies Act. I appreciate the thought he's put into this issue, and I'm certainly going to review his legislation with an open mind, but make no mistake, legislation to fix future abuses of this law, that doesn't address the abuse we have happening right now. His bill does not address the fact that this president is trying to do an end run around Congress, an end run around both Democrats and Republicans alike, and cynically using an emergency declaration to fund a request that we had voted on and did not approve. We must send a message to the president that this is unacceptable. This is not something that nobody's ever voted on. We have voted on this matter. And under the Constitution, that is what is supposed to carry the day. And I hope my Republican friends take a moment to take stock of where we are. President Trump's going to be but a moment in our nation's history. But the Constitution should control our history, no matter who is president. And for the sake of appeasing a man who made a foolish campaign promise that was never grounded in reality, won't they stand up for the institution which they serve? For the sake of appeasing a president who detests any limits or checks on his authority, even those in the Constitution, will they forever diminish the role of Congress as a co-equal branch of government? Now is the time for country over party. And I'll vote aye on the joint resolution of disapproval. I urge all senators to do the same. Mr. President, I do not see somebody seeking the floor. I'm about to suggest the absence of quorum. Is this under controlled time?
The time is controlled equally between the proponents and opponents.
I suggest the absence of quorum, but ask unanimous consent that the time consumed by the quorum be equally divided between both sides.
Without objection. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
You've been listening to discussion on the floor of the U.S. Senate about the resolution of disapproval on the President's national emergency declaration at the southern border. Now, as this has been going on, the President has been active on Twitter. Let me show you a couple of the things he's had to say about this. The President said, prominent legal scholars agree that our actions to address the national emergency at the southern border and to protect the American people are both constitutional and expressly authorized by Congress. If at a later date Congress wants to update the law, I will support those efforts, but today's issue is border security and crime. Don't vote with Pelosi. And then he summarized by saying, a vote for today's resolution by Republican senators is a vote for Nancy Pelosi, crime, and the open border Democrats. Here's one from earlier as well. The President tweeted about 3 hours ago that Democrats are border deniers. They refuse to see or acknowledge the death, crime, drugs, and human trafficking at our southern border. He also said earlier this morning, a big national emergency vote today by the United States Senate on border security and the wall, which is already under major construction. I am prepared to veto if necessary. The southern border is a national security and humanitarian nightmare, but it can be easily fixed. So there you have the President's reactions on Twitter. Right now, Senator Tom Cotton is speaking on the Senate floor. I want to show you, we had the Republicans earlier talk about the Green New Deal. We've had a couple of Republican and Democratic senators speaking from the Senate floor, including Senator Susan Collins of Maine, encouraging fellow senators to vote for the resolution of disapproval of the National Emergency Declaration. Short while ago, I promised I would show this. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi held her weekly news conference. Let's listen to what Speaker Pelosi had to say during that news conference.
Them from Massachusetts. Different now. Anyway, here we are. This is a very special day for us beyond the wonder of St. Patrick. Today on the Senate side, the Senate will hopefully vote for the Constitution of the United States to uphold the oath of office that we all take by, again, voting to reject the president's unconstitutional measure that does violence on the Constitution. That's a good thing. We'll then send the bill to the president. In the House, we voted to protect the truth for the American people. Overwhelmingly, I think over 400 votes. 4 voted present. Everyone else voted for the Mueller resolution, which would
Fantastic country.
Mr. President, do you support Ireland's position on Brexit?
Sorry to interrupt.
I'm not
that.
going to comment on Brexit. I can tell you
President
it's
Trump is
a very
right now
complex
while
thing
he
that's
goes,
going on right now. It's tearing a country apart.
head of
It's
state
actually tearing
counterpart
a lot
from
of countries
Ireland. Let's
apart. And it's a shame that it has to be that way, but I think we will stay right in our lane. We're doing fantastically as a country. Our economy is booming. We're the envy of the world. Other economies are not doing well, and we're doing record business. So we're very happy about that, and it's really great to have the Prime Minister of Ireland with us. Well, I think he's got a lot of hand movement. I've never seen so much hand movement. I said, is he crazy, or is that just the way he acts? So I've never seen hand movement. I watched him a little while this morning doing, I assume it was some kind of a news conference, and I've actually never seen anything quite like it. Study it. I'm sure you'll agree.
Who's the bigger threat, Beto O'Rourke or Joe Biden?
I just say whoever it is, I'll take him on, okay? Him or her. Whoever it is, I'll take him or her on. And I think with the economy doing so well, with all of the things we've done, with the tax cuts, the biggest in the history of our country, tax cuts, with people having a lot more money in their pocket, with their 401ks hitting record numbers, they've never been considered great investors by their wives or by their husbands, whatever it may be, and now they're considered great investments. But the market's hitting almost new highs, and I have all of the records, every single record I have, every single record for the stock market. So I think it's going to be very tough to beat. If you look at African American, if you look at Hispanic or Asian unemployment, we have the best records in history. In the history of unemployment, we have the best records. So I think it's going to be tough for somebody, but you know what? Whoever it is, it makes no difference to me whatsoever. I will. I'll be coming at some point during the year. I missed it last time, and I would have loved to have been there, and it's a special place, and I have a very warm spot for Doonbeg. I will tell you that, and it's just a great place, really great.
Mr. President, yesterday you made a decision about the Boeing planes. How long do you think that they will be grounded?
Oh, I hope it's going to be for a short period of time, and I hope it's, look, they have to find out what it is. The biggest thing is they have to find out what it is. I'm not sure that they know, but I thought we had to do it. We had to take a cautionary route. The grounding of the planes yesterday was a big thing, as you know, and you're involved with Boeing also.
We've done the same, yeah.
The grounding was a big thing, and it's a great company. It's a truly great company, and hopefully they'll figure it out very quickly. It was a big decision. It's also one of our largest exporters, one of our, truly one of the truly great companies of the world. They have to figure it out fast. They know that. They're under great pressure.
Why did you take that decision so much later than other companies?
Are you still a great supporter of Brexit, given how things are playing?
Well, I was. It wasn't that I was a supporter. I predicted it was going to happen, and I was right. And people laughed when I predicted it, and they won by about 2 points. And I was standing out on Turnberry, and we had a press conference, and people were screaming. That was the day before, if you remember. I think you were there. And people were screaming, and I said, no, I think it's going to happen. And people were surprised I made the prediction, and because President Obama made the opposite prediction, and I was right. And I will tell you, I'm surprised at how badly it's all gone from the standpoint of a negotiation. But I gave the Prime Minister my ideas on how to negotiate it, and I think you would have been successful. She didn't listen to that, and that's fine. I mean, she's got to do what she's got to do, but I think it could have been negotiated in a different manner, frankly. I hate to see everything being ripped apart right now. I don't think another vote would be possible, because it would be very unfair to the people that won. They'd say, what do you mean you're going to take another vote? So that'll be tough. But I thought it would happen. It did happen, and both sides are very, very, they're cemented in. It's a tough situation. It's a shame. Frankly, it's a shame. There was no reason for that to happen. They could have had the vote, and it should have gone smoothly. Unfortunately, it didn't. Very complicated issue. And actually, the issue on the border of Ireland is one of the most complex points.
Do you think it should be extended to get more time?
Well, I think they're going to probably have to do something, because right now they're in the midst of a very short period of time, the end of the month, and they're not going to be able to do that. So it's going to be. But I'd like to see that whole situation with Brexit work out. I'd like to see, we're talking to them about trade, and we can do a very big trade deal with the UK. We're also renegotiating our trade deal with the European groups and, literally individual nations, and also with the whole. But it's very sad to see what's happening there. And there was no reason, and I'm sure, Leo, I'm sure you agree with that. Do you have any feeling would you like to express your feelings on Brexit?
Yeah, well...
Maybe I should not let you do it. I'll just get you in trouble.
We have a different opinion, President. I regret that Brexit's happening, and the UK was a really important part of the European Union, but they're going now, and that's their decision. But the most important thing for us in Ireland is that their decision to leave shouldn't cause any problems in Northern Ireland, where people actually voted to stay, and that we shouldn't have a hard border or anything to disrupt the peace process. And also we want to make sure that we still have frictionless trade between Britain and Ireland, because I believe in free trade, and I think it'll be a few years until the United Kingdom sorts itself out. But in the meantime, the European Union is available to talk trade with the US.
And we're talking about trade with the European Union. They've been very, very tough over the years. They were unwilling to negotiate with the Obama administration, and they were unwilling before that, to be honest. I'm not just blaming President Obama. But they're willing to talk to us, and if they don't talk to us, we're going to do something that's going to be pretty severe economically. We're going to tariff a lot of their products coming in, because the European Union treats us very, very unfairly. I have to say that. Very, very. They treat the United States, and they have been for many years, for decades. They've treated us very unfairly. So it'll probably work out. They're negotiating. They want to see if they can get. Otherwise, we're going to do something that's going to be good for the United States.
Mr. President, considering the vote today in the Senate, will you consider the national emergency?
No, I don't know what the vote will be. It doesn't matter. I'll probably have to veto. And it's not going to be overturned, and we're going to have our whole thing. It's been, the legal scholars all say it's totally constitutional. It's very important. It's really a border security vote. It's pure and simple. It's a vote for border security. It's a vote for no crime. See, we have a border situation also, but it's slightly different than yours. Ours is not actually complex. We have very, very bad laws that are archaic, that were put in by Democrats, and the Republicans didn't fight hard enough at the time. That was a long time before me, but we have catch and release, and we have chain migration, and we have all sorts of things that are horrible. And the world is laughing at the laws that were passed with respect to us. And we are going to have a very strong border very soon. We're building a lot of wall. There's a lot of wall going up. I don't know if you see it. I don't know if you want to see it. But we're building a lot of wall, and there's a lot of contracts being let out actually tomorrow and over the next week for additional many, many miles of wall. And we're going to have hundreds of miles of wall up fairly soon. And it's going to make a very big difference. But we also have to change the laws, because whether it's visa lottery, whether it's chain migration, whether it's catch and release or anything else, they are horrible, horrible laws. I want to just commend our Border Patrol and ICE, what they've been doing. Border Patrol and our military, by the way, has been fantastic. We're building a lot of the barbed wire areas where people were pouring through. They're not going through. They have done a fantastic job. We've built some temporary fencing, and we built some permanent fencing with the military. They have done a fantastic job. But the Border Patrol, they are capturing, catching, grabbing. They're doing whatever they have to do. Thousands of people, thousands of illegal aliens a month. 75,000 last month. The job they're doing, they're apprehending. Call it whatever you want to use, whatever you like to use, but they're apprehending thousands and thousands of people a month, and we're catching them and we're keeping them. We're not doing a release. Now, at a certain point, we're going to have to do some release, because we don't have the bed space, we don't have the room, and we don't have the funds to build new space, because we have ridiculous laws. In other countries, Leo, when you have somebody come in illegally, you say, sorry, you have to leave. In our country, because the laws are so ridiculous, I mean, so stupid, we have to give them a trial. So we send them into the country, then they're supposed to come back, but they never come back. Very rarely do they come back. The most ridiculous set of laws, the Democrats' fault. We want to change them. Unfortunately, we need their votes too, and I think it's going to be a great election issue. Okay, anything else?
Say
it.
Are your immigration policies cruel?
No, I don't think they're cruel. I think they're the opposite of cruel. They become cruel because they're so ridiculous, and it hurts people. It actually does the reverse of what they're supposed to be doing. But no, they're actually meant to be the opposite, and they're hurting people. They're really hurting people, a lot of people. And I think that we have done an incredible job. We're apprehending record numbers of people. But if we had border security, if we had the wall, if we had a proper wall, which we're building now as we speak, and we're getting a lot more funding for it, as you know, in what we're talking about and the vote today, whether it's positive or not, I'm vetoing it unless I don't have to veto. I think that's unlikely. I'll do a veto. It's not going to be overturned. But we have done a great job at the border through apprehension. But we shouldn't have to be put in a position of apprehending 75,000 people a month. We shouldn't be in that position. Thank you all very much. I love being with the Prime Minister of Ireland. Thank you very much.
What are the prospects now of the summit with President Xi this month or next month?
We're doing very well with China talks. China talks are doing very well. We'll see what happens. If it's not a deal that's a great deal for us, we're not going to make it. But I would say that we're moving along at a very high level. We're getting what we have to get, and I think we're getting it relatively quickly. So the China talks are moving along. As to whether or not we'll strike a final deal, that I would never want to say, but they're moving along very well.
Mr. President, did you intervene in Jared Kushner's security clearance and Ivanka Trump's?
Thank you very much.
Thank you, President.
Very much.
What I would do and how I would do it.
All right, thanks,
She's got a wrong way of doing it. That's okay. Thank you, everybody. We may very well be doing that.
Thank you, everybody.
May very well be doing that.
What? No, you wouldn't be in.
Thank you, President.
You're Irish.
Grab yourself. Come on. Right this way. This way. This way. This way.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, President. Keep going. Thank you. Keep moving.
You've been watching an Oval Office spray there. That's what they call those events when the White House press corps is invited in to see the president sitting with a visiting foreign leader, in this case the Prime Minister of Ireland. The president reaffirming some of his views about the resolution of disapproval on the national emergency declaration. Talk about that as we watch the Senate floor here. That vote is expected at 2 p.m. today, is what I'm hearing. We carried some of the senators talking about that. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell was speaking primarily about a departing chief of staff, but you heard some Democrats and a Republican, Senator Susan Collins of Maine, talk about casting votes for the resolution of disapproval. That is expected to occur today. I apologize, we jumped right into the president's remarks there. They were on tape delay, but I was trying to bring you House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's press conference. We'll bring that to you right now. We'll restart that from the top. I think we're only a few seconds in. This was House Speaker Nancy Pelosi holding her weekly media availability, and then we'll get to some local news. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's weekly news conference with the media from earlier this morning.
Them from Massachusetts. Different now. Anyway, here we are. This is a very special day for us beyond the wonder of St. Patrick. Today on the Senate side, the Senate will hopefully vote for the Constitution of the United States to uphold the oath of office that we all take by, again, voting to reject the president's unconstitutional measure that does violence on the Constitution. That's a good thing. We'll then send the bill to the president. In the House, we voted to protect the truth for the American people. overwhelmingly, I think over 400 votes. 4 voted present, everyone else voted for the Mueller resolution, which would ensure that the American people get the truth. We will send that bill over to the Senate. As we leave for this district work period, members are going home again to talk about what we promised for the people. Lower health care costs by lowering the cost of prescription drugs, bigger paychecks by building the infrastructure of America in a green way, and cleaner government. And we are so proud to have passed H.R. 1 last Friday to that end. In regard to the other 2 categories, hearings and even some legislation has been marked up in terms of moving us closer to passing an infrastructure bill. We'll work. That's something that in both of those areas, lowering prescription drug prices and building infrastructure, 2 areas that the president has said he wants to work on together. So we're moving in that direction in a bipartisan way. At the same time, we're very dismayed by the president's budget. Budget is supposed to be a statement of our national values. What's important to us as a nation should be reflected in how we allocate our resources. I'm fond of saying around here, show me your values, show me your budget. The budget that the president put forth is appalling. And it cuts $2 trillion out of Medicare and Medicaid. Well, the list goes on and on about things that it does. Steals $2 trillion from Medicaid and Medicare, hurting families and farmers and hungry families by slashing $220 billion from the SNAP food assistance and cutting agriculture department budget by almost 15%, pushes affordable college further from reach by cutting $207 billion from student loan initiatives, and endangering life-saving medical research by cutting $5 billion from the National Institutes of Health. How could it be? If there is scientific opportunity, it's almost a biblical way, the power to save lives, the power to cure. If we have scientific opportunity, I believe we have a moral responsibility to fund it, and that is bipartisan in the Congress, in the House, and in the Senate. So we will fight these cuts to the National Institutes of Health, including cuts at the National Cancer Institute, and continue his demands for billions of wasteful dollars for his ineffective wall. In addition to what I mentioned about for the people.
All right, let's interrupt this one more time. This is tape playback of Empire star Jussie Smollett appearing in court, where he made he pleaded not guilty to the 16 felonies he is charged with. Let's listen into that appearance.
We start anywhere between 9:30 and 9:45.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
One other matter, Your Honor. As part of Mr. Smollett's bail conditions, he's to seek court permission prior to leaving the state. Previously, we had discussed with the people, our offices are located in both California and New York. Having Mr. Smollett be able to travel freely to New York and California to meet with us as needed. I believe the people had no objection. Previously, we did get permission for specific travel, but we would ask Your Honor to approve of him traveling both to California and New York without specific permission from the court each time he needs to do so. Obviously, our schedules are always changing. We don't know exactly when we'll need to meet with him. It would be helpful not to have to run into court every time to seek permission, and we're happy to have him notify his pretrial services officer prior to his travel.
State.
Judge, we have no objection to him traveling to meet his attorneys. It would be helpful if we knew specific dates. However, based upon counsel's representation, the state has no objection.
All right. Well, the motion for the defendant to travel for the sole purpose of meeting with counsel to the states of New York and the state of California will be granted. We're asking that the defendant notify pretrial services at least 48 hours prior to travel, and to notify pretrial services 24 hours on his return.
We will do that, Your Honor.
And let's put that in an order.
Okay.
Okay. Now, anything else? Nothing regarding media coverage, anything of that nature?
I believe that the media has to now file an additional motion before Your Honor requesting permission for extended media coverage.
That is correct. All right. All right, well, we'll see you back on 4/17. Prepare that order. Give it to my clerk, and I'll review it and then sign it and have it stamped.
Yes, Your Honor. Thank
All right.
you.
Have a good day. Thank you.
All right, so you were watching Empire star Jussie Smollett entering a not guilty plea. And there is your Chiron to explain what was happening. It would help if I turned the right one on. There we go. That was Jussie Smollett in court this morning in Cook County, Illinois, pleading not guilty to the charges he faces in relation to the case where he is accused of making a false report about an attack, a racist and homophobic attack. Have a lot of things going on this morning. Hence the, I was showing you color bars for a couple seconds there. All right. Before that, it was President Trump and the Prime Minister of Ireland meeting in the Oval Office. Let's try to, if we can get through the rest of this uninterrupted, I'll show you the rest of Nancy Pelosi's weekly press conference. Here is that event.
Full access to be protected fully by the Civil Rights Act and H.R. 6, the legislation to help our Dreamers, temporary protective status folks, and DED, and also as I said, the gun legislation of the week before. So when I talk to our outside friends, the grassroots activists and the rest, they're very thrilled about H.R. 8, the bill to end gun violence, to provide gun violence prevention, and also 1112 that closes the South Carolina loophole. So with our original agenda for the people, the additional protecting the Dreamers, et.cetera., protecting people, the LGBTQ, and also, ending gun violence in our country. We have quite a remarkable legislative achievements as we go forward. And by the time we will have been here 100 days, shortly after we come back, we'll have even more results in this regard. And one more, and that's net neutrality that we talked about last week, which will come to the floor shortly after our return. So we have a full agenda. We're making progress, and that's what we said we would do, with transparency, with as much bipartisanship as possible, and in a unifying way for our country. Any questions?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
You said in your comments that were reported this week about impeaching the president just isn't worth it. But if the Mueller report comes back and suggests criminal activity in the White House, could you change your mind?
Well, it's a question of when I say what isn't worth our time. 40% of the American people cannot withstand a $500 surprise expense, be it their water heater or their carburetor or whatever it happens to be. Our focus was on what we said we would do: health care, job creation, cleaner government, gun safety, issues like that. And it is not worth our time to take our attention from that. And if I'm somebody in the public who is feeling that financial pain, and I see us focusing on one thing and another, but not on my financial interest, that is not a source of hope for people. If the Mueller report comes back with information, I don't think we should impeach a president for political reasons, and I don't think we should not impeach a president for political reasons. But you have to be ironclad in terms of your facts, and we'll see where that takes us. Yes, ma'am. Congratulations. Good. Thank you. That's exciting.
Running for president. What, in your view, was Beto O'Rourke's signature accomplishment as a member of the House?
Beto brought a great deal of vitality to Congress. One of the issues in his, as I haven't been asked this question, but I just know of his record here. When he came as a real champion for the environment. He got a great deal of support from the environmental community in his district. He won in a primary on that subject. And also, he's a member of the Armed Services Committee, a strong member of the Armed Services Committee, which is very important for his district. So in preserving our planet and protecting our people, there are at least two areas in addition to his vitality in so many other ways. I think all of our candidates are great. I just say to all of them who ask, just be yourself, what you believe in. Show them what's in your heart. You can talk about the facts and the figures, and they expect you to know that. So you have to demonstrate your why. What is your purpose? Why are you running? What do you know about the subjects that you know best, and can your judgment be trusted on that and for other reasons? How do you expect to get something done? And that's all up here. Show them what's in your heart. If you show them what you believe, even if they don't agree with you all the time, they will trust your authenticity. That's what I say to all of them, and I think that Beto is a welcome addition to the field.
And do you think that the experience he has here in the House is a strong enough foundation to jump to the Oval Office?
And you ask me that when we have a president in the United States, or never, please. Yes. The answer is yes. Yes.
Madam Speaker, thank you. You talk about the...
Didn't you just have a question? Oh, that was last week.
Not today. That was last week. I had a couple last week, if I recall. Anyway, thank you. We have the luncheon with the Taoiseach and the President today. I know when you had a good personal relationship with President George W. Bush, and you used to use some of these social occasions to talk policy with him. I know you're not in the same room with the President very often. Is there anything you would like to bring up with the President today, since you will be in the same room at the luncheon today?
No, I don't think we use this luncheon as any policy discussion other than what we say at the podium. And that's what it'll be.
So none of these disputes about the budget, none of these?
No. Okay. No, the President is a guest in our house. We will treat him as a guest in our house and are honored by his presence to welcome the Taoiseach. The Taoiseach, who's LGBTQ, his father is an Indian, as we say, only in America.
Madam Speaker.
Yes, ma'am.
Madam Speaker, how do you think the FAA handled the Ethiopian air crash and questions about Boeing 737 MAX and the timing of when they grounded planes?
I do know that our chairman of our committee, Mr. DeFazio, and the chair of the subcommittee, Mr. Rick Larson of Washington State, were right on it, and they were getting as much information as they could from the FAA on it, so that we could be making a judgment based on fact. The fact that so many countries had already made their decision. Again, just because we would ask for it doesn't mean it would happen. So I was pleased that the President made the decision that he made.
Madam Speaker, on H.R. 1, there's been some criticism from the ACLU about it in regards to the freedom of speech issue. And as far as 16-year-olds voting, where do you see that going into the future?
Well, I disagree with the ACLU on this. In terms of legislation, we couldn't be prouder than H.R. 1. This is about reducing the role of big, dark, special interest money in politics and empowering small donors. It's about ending voter suppression. It's about making redistricting fair. It's really a source of joy and hope to so many people in the country. I myself, personally, I'm not speaking for my caucus, I myself have always been for lowering the voting age to 16. I think it's really important to capture kids when they're in high school, when they're interested in all of this, when they're learning about government, to be able to vote. That is not necessary. In other words, some of the priorities in this bill are about transparency and openness and accessibility and the rest. That's a subject of debate. But my view is that I would welcome that. But I've been in that position for a long time.
Madam Speaker,
Again, you've been watching Nancy Pelosi's news conference from earlier. We're going to step away here and take you to some local news. Let's first get a look at your weather conditions. Here is our next weather maker moving into the area. That will bring some showers and thunderstorms tomorrow. Right now, we have warmed up to 51 degrees. Oops, there we go. Put that over the cityscape there for you. 51 degrees in Philadelphia, dew point 35, winds out of the south at 5 miles per hour. Here's a closer look at ultimate Doppler radar. Not much activity to speak of. Your current temperatures, as we mentioned, look at that, lots of green. 51 degrees in Philadelphia, 50s, 56, 57 along the coast right now, 58 in Dover. Even Mount Pocono is up to 41 degrees right now. Your northeast temperatures, you see some 60s down to our south and west in Charlottesville. They're even above freezing in Bangor, Maine. 43 in Burlington, 43 in Boston. You see it's up to 78 in Miami, 75 in Tampa, 77 in New Orleans. So plenty of warm weather on the southeast, but look at the west where that blizzard is hitting the Rockies and into the plains. 25 in Denver, 32 in Salt Lake City. So there's your cold air, but it's not affecting us right now. Our temperature change, it's at least 9 degrees warmer in this hour from the same time yesterday. Winds only 6 miles per hour in Philadelphia right now. The high point is Dover 12. And no real gusts to speak of. You see the winds carrying that warm air from the south. And so we don't have much of a wind chill to speak of either. Your visibilities are good. Not much on satellite. Let's get you a look at the national futurecast there. You see overnight yesterday, you see that line of showers starting to creep into western Pennsylvania. Let's show you a bit about what happens when they get a little closer to our area. There you see some up. Let's back that on up. 5 o'clock Thursday, 9 o'clock Thursday, 3 a.m. Friday. Then by the rush hour, we could see some rain in the area. Later in the day, more rain. And it looks like some wintry stuff to our west on Saturday, but it doesn't quite get to our area. This is, of course, the GFS model we're looking at right now. Monday could be some wintry precip to our west for the morning rush hour, and then moving through the area. And again, later into Monday. So let's get you a look at your full 7-day forecast from the Weather Authority. Increasing clouds, milder on Thursday, 64. Friday, showers, windy, 66. Sunny, cooler, 50 on Saturday. Sunny and chilly, 45 on Sunday for St. Patrick's Day. That's a nice 3-day stretch there, a 9, a 6, and an 8 on our forecast by the numbers. Leading into Sunday, when it gets chilly again a little bit. Monday looks sunny and chilly, 46. Tuesday, sunny and chilly, 47. Wednesday, spring, sunny and milder, 52. Let me check one other futurecast here. We'll see what it's showing for the next couple of days. It has a lot of that precipitation staying out of here. So I might have had an old file there I was showing you, but it does look like, as you saw in the 7-day forecast there, it'll be chilly, but it does look like we are not expecting any wintry precipitation to start the next work week. Of course, you can always get the latest forecast from our Weather Authority app, now available and newly updated in the Google Play and Apple iTunes stores. In the 2 weeks since we launched the updated app, we've had several thousand new users. A lot more activity in there. I think people are really enjoying the more user-friendly scroll when you enter the app rather than the interactive radar that it used to put you straight into. much easier to surface and find a lot of the features that are available in there. The weather forecast video, the live stream, getting to know our meteorologists a little bit better. The hourly forecast, I think, is a big one. I use that all the time, especially when I'm trying to plan sporting events. I'm a soccer coach, so whether or not we're going to have rain later in the evening for practice or other events. All right, let's get you a little bit of news. We've been carrying a lot of local events, or excuse me, national events. The Senate floor, the White House news conferences, but let's get you a look at some local stories that we've been covering all morning. The first one actually is a national story. That will be former Texas Congressman Beto O'Rourke officially announced his 2020 presidential bid. Here is the video in which he did that.
Amy and I are happy to share with you that I'm running to serve you as the next President of the United States of America. This is a defining moment of truth for this country and for every single one of us. The challenges that we face right now, the interconnected crises in our economy, our democracy, and our climate have never been greater, and they will either consume us or they will afford us the greatest opportunity to unleash the genius of the United States of America. In other words, this moment of peril produces perhaps the greatest moment of promise for this country and for everyone inside of it. We can begin by fixing our democracy and ensuring that our government works for everyone and not just for corporations. We can invest in the dignity of those who work and those who seek to work. We can ensure that every single American can see a doctor and be well enough to live to their full potential. And all of us, wherever you live, can acknowledge that if immigration is a problem, it's the best possible problem for this country to have. And we should ensure that there are lawful paths to work, to be with family, and to flee persecution. We can listen to and lift up rural America. We can work on real justice reform and confront the hard truths of slavery and segregation and suppression in these United States of America. We can reassert our global leadership and end these decades-long wars and be there for every woman and man who has served in them. And perhaps most importantly of all, because our very existence depends on it, we can unleash the ingenuity and creativity of millions of Americans who want to ensure that we squarely confront the challenge of climate change before it's too late. This is going to be a positive campaign that seeks to bring out the very best from every single one of us, that seeks to unite a very divided country. We saw the power of this in Texas, where people allowed no difference, however great or however small, to stand between them and divide us, whether it was religion or gender or income or geography. We put our labels and our differences aside to come together for the only thing that matters: the future of this country and the generations that will follow us. Over the coming days, I'm going to travel this country and listen to those who I seek to serve, to understand from your perspective how we can best.
Again, that was former Congressman Beto O'Rourke, the Texas Senate candidate, speaking in that YouTube video there. I believe it was on YouTube, but he was announcing his 2020 presidential bid. Democrat from Texas. I believe text messaged a TV station is how word first got out, a station down in El Paso where he's from, to disclose that he was in fact going to be running for office, running for the presidency in 2020. The president addressed, we showed you some tape from the Oval Office where the president was meeting with the Prime Minister of Ireland, and he had some thoughts about O'Rourke's entry into the race. Let's move on to a national story with local implications. This is the U.S. grounded Boeing 737 MAX 8 and 9 jets after Sunday's Ethiopian Airlines plane crash killed 157 people. It was the second deadly crash involving MAX jets within 6 months. The move came after experts announced there are indicators that the pilots in both the Ethiopian airline and last October's Lion Air crashes struggled to control the plane. The president made the announcement yesterday, and it comes as the black boxes are on the way to France for analysis. First, I'm going to give you, this is Fox's Doug Luzader talking about the situation, and then we'll have Fox 29's Sabina Kyriakos with a local report from Philadelphia International Airport.
The FAA found itself under enormous pressure to ground the 737 MAX aircraft and ultimately made an about-face after the president weighed in. The evidence has been mounting that this week's crash of Ethiopia Airlines Flight 302 has some striking similarities to the Lion Air crash in Indonesia back in October. And now U.S. carriers will have to stop flying the 737 MAX 8 aircraft after President Trump had heard enough.
And hopefully they'll very quickly come up with the answer, but until they do, the planes are grounded.
And despite initially backing the 737 MAX, the FAA fell into line, now following the lead of other countries that have banned or grounded the planes. 3 major U.S. carriers are affected: Southwest, American, and United. All will have to shift aircraft around now to accommodate passengers. And certainly there are some travelers who are breathing a sigh of relief.
I think it was the right decision given that the rest of the world is doing the same thing, and it's a prudent thing to be doing until we know more about what's going on.
But it is a big setback for Boeing, which had been working quickly to fill orders for the 737 MAX, while at the same time trying to address software issues that may have caused the aircraft at times to incorrectly pitch down.
These planes needed to be grounded and then let the FAA safety officials and the Boeing safety officials work together to find out what's wrong. Is it technological problems? Is it pilot error? Is it something else?
And one of the real triggers here for the FAA, beyond pressure from the president, was new satellite tracking data indicating that both of these 737 MAX 8 aircraft that crashed flew in a similar fashion in their final moments. In Washington, Doug Luzader, Fox News.
And as I mentioned, our Sabina Kyriakos was at the airport this morning with more on the local impact on both the airlines and travelers who are trying to get around with fewer planes in service. Here is Sabina.
Yeah, exactly. So folks were worried about their safety, and they were saying that the grounding was overdue, but they were also hoping that the airlines had contingency plans in place so that when this did happen, passengers weren't left scrambling to figure out their flights. So the good news is that it looks like things are shaking out okay, but we did have some cancellations early this morning. We got here around 3 o'clock, and there were definitely people at the head of that Southwest line waiting to be helped by an attendant. They told me some folks had their flights canceled last night, others early this morning. They talked about long wait times when they tried to call Southwest. Now we know Southwest has 34 MAX 8s. That's the most of any U.S. airline in this country. And also American Airlines, they have 24 MAX 8s, and United has about 14 MAX 9s. Now the good news again is that American and United out of Philly, they don't seem to have much of a problem, but Southwest was the one that we were dealing with. So, of course, we talked to passengers who were scrambling and frustrated. Here's what they told us.
I found out this morning at 2 a.m. that the flight was canceled. I tried calling the number, and I wasn't able to get through. It was a 115-minute wait.
We panicked that we weren't going to, because we have reservations down there and tickets to the games, and so... Well, hopefully we'll get there.
It's scary. It's scary. I feel bad for the people that were grounded.
Safety. Safety first.
I feel bad for the people who were on an airplane waiting to go or on the way, but they did what they thought they had to do at the last minute.
Yeah, key word there being last minute. So again, a lot of passengers were saying, this should have been figured out ahead of time, as the airlines might have been anticipating what was going to happen. But let's bring it back out here. Philly International, busy this morning. The good news we want to report is that the passengers that we talked to, for the most part, they did have to deal with those cancellations and they did have to book later flights, but it looks like that they were able to book those flights, at least the ones that we spoke with. Also, you guys, we want to mention weather. Right now, it seems like that's a big factor here with those flights heading out to the Midwest, Denver in particular, having some issues as well. For the most part, the grounding of the Boeings, that seems to be working out okay as of now. Back to you.
All right, we've got some fantastic footage here. Our chopper is up in the air, Skyfox, and they're following what appears to be a bald eagle. Our chopper crew was north of Wilmington, and then they were headed back, and they spotted the bald eagle here, and they've been following it for a little bit. The footage is so good, I thought it was something we were recording off the internet, and then I realized that no, that was actually our chopper feed. Bird directly below them right now in an office park. We'll just sit back and enjoy this for a moment or two. Some fantastic camera work by our crew there in Skyfox. We'll have to see if we can get that full video and maybe post it online or on our YouTube page someplace and get that up. Well, we also, sad saving statistics. Could you afford an emergency $400 repair bill? The number of Americans who can't. Fox Business Network's Tracy Carrasco had more in this in this conversation from Good Day Philadelphia this morning.
What I found under my mattress this morning.
Money.
Money.
How much money?
It's only about $6, $7.
Hey, that counts.
But I found this
That's
study.
That's a Taco Bell Chalupa.
You know, there's only about 1/5 of all of us here in the United States that have any savings at all in a bank.
So let's get to Tracy. Now, Mike, did you find this surprising, or you thought it was?
I thought it might be more than that. Like almost half of Americans don't have much in their savings account, Tracy.
Well, it's actually 1/5 of Americans have no money saved for any sort of unexpected costs. So about 21% of working Americans say they have no money saved up at all. And as far as those who are saving money, a majority are saying that they're saving less than 10% of their income, which we've heard from financial analysts. Really not enough. You should be saving a lot more. But this is kind of a trend that has been trending downward since the 1980s, when Americans had about a double, as far as double digits when it comes to their savings and what they were putting away. So it's an interesting concept that we're moving away from that, even though we're doing much better as far as the economy, the what people are making nowadays. But it's all coming down, I think, to debt. People have much more debt nowadays. They've got student loans, car payments, mortgages, all of that they're working to pay off instead of putting that money away to save. So the consumer debt in America is $4 trillion. So we've got a lot to pay off.
$4 trillion. All right, I'll work on that. It's hard to save, Trace, that's for sure.
Yeah, you have to have
It
discipline.
is.
Yeah,
Yes, it is.
21%.
My mother used to tell me when I get my little allowance, all right, take a part of it off and pay yourself first, and then you can have the rest to do what you want.
Pay yourself first.
That's what she'd call
That's
it.
always what.
We'll see you tomorrow. Thank you.
That was Fox Business Network's Tracy Carrasco. We already did weather, so let's move on to a few other stories before we go. In Newcastle County, police are investigating the deaths of a woman and her toddler. Investigators found the bodies of a 45-year-old woman and an 18-month-old boy yesterday morning at an apartment complex on Richard Drive in Newport. Police are calling this a suspicious death investigation, saying they are not looking for suspects and there's no threat to the public. In Chester County, a man is accused of sexually assaulting children at his home daycare in Penn Township. Pennsylvania State Police say James Batista sexually assaulted a 3-year-old who attended Little Friends Daycare. While investigating, they found 3 other alleged victims, ages 3 to 7. Investigators say it happened between 2006 and 2009. They believe there may be more victims, so if you have any tips, call state police. That's Pennsylvania State Police.
I think it's pretty scary. I mean, we have kids in this neighborhood, and we don't want them getting hurt. It's concerning, of course. I mean, it's something we don't want to see. We don't want any houses broken into.
I think I should get more careful. I walk around with my phone so that if I have to dial 911 or take pictures of things in my neighborhood and pass them on if I see anybody suspicious. And so far, we just think they were walking around. And there were like 4 different cases. As my girlfriend showed me the whole police report, there were 3 incidences, and then there was one that just looked suspicious.
Plumstead Township Police are asking anyone with information to give them a call. Again, these people are not suspects in a crime or anything. Police are calling this a case of suspicious activity, and they'd like to talk to the people who were involved or captured in the footage to see what was happening here in this Bucks County community. Three years, that's how long a 26-year-old Easton woman will spend in prison after stealing nearly $78,000 from a family member who suffers from dementia. New Jersey officials say Deanna Attinello started taking money from her 86-year-old great-aunt after she was named her legal guardian back in 2017. In addition to the prison sentence, she will have to pay $48,000 in restitution. And in New Jersey, lawmakers will decide if childhood abuse victims should have more time to seek legal action. The state Senate is voting on legislation that would allow victims to sue until they turn 55 or within 7 years of realizing that the abuse caused them harm. The bill also would give a 2-year window to victims who were previously barred by the statute of limitations. The current limit is 2 years. The measure is moving ahead despite opposition from the state's Catholic Conference. And one quick update to give you. I know I showed you a video of Jussie Smollett in court earlier this morning in Cook County. I can tell you that he has pleaded guilty to, pled not guilty to lying about the attack. Again, Jussie Smollett, the Empire actor, has pleaded not guilty to the charges accusing him of lying to the police about being the victim of a racist and homophobic attack in downtown Chicago a few weeks ago. We have a full story up on our website, fox29.com. We'll continue to bring you the latest about that case and all other news that's going on. We have more on Beto O'Rourke's announcement of the 2020 White House bid. We have a weather forecast story for you. Meek Mill weekend designated by City Council, and a mom and baby found dead before a court appearance. That was the story that I mentioned to you earlier. Let me show you the video for that and get you that update. They're now saying that this was before a court appearance. The 45-year-old woman and her 1-year-old son were found dead in their Delaware apartment just hours before the woman was supposed to appear in family court. Police have not yet released the identities of those involved. We showed you the story just a few moments ago, but they've classified the deaths as suspicious. A witness, Andrea Bender of Newport, identified the mother as her sister, Laura B. Connell, and the baby as Connell's son, Walton. This is according to the Associated Press. Bender says she arrived to drive the pair to family court Wednesday morning so Connell could surrender the baby to his father. But she says Connell did not come out, so she entered the apartment and found the bodies. Newcastle County Police Master Corporal Michelle Eckert says the Delaware Division of Forensic Science will determine the causes of death. So an update on that story, sad story, just before we go. Take one more look at the Senate. Looks like they're talking about economic policy and China right now, but there will be an important vote at 2 o'clock where the Senate will be voting on a resolution of disapproval for the president's national emergency declaration at the southern border. Even if, and it seems that that resolution will be passed with at least 5 Republican votes. Could be more, but at least 5. That will result in a potential veto, the first potential veto of President Trump's presidency. So we'll be watching that for you and bringing you the latest on Fox29.com. And of course, we'll have the latest on all these stories on the Fox 29 News at 5, 6, 10, and 11 tonight. I want to thank you very much for joining us today on News Now. We're with you weekdays at 10 a.m. after Good Day Philadelphia. Have a great rest of your Thursday, and we'll see you Friday morning.